I've enjoyed talking with you more than I expected, and that realization caught me off guard because my day had started with my own sister humiliating me in public. Sitting across from Harrison Walsh in that quiet cafe felt surreal, almost like I had stepped into someone else's life for a few hours. Outside the windows, downtown Phoenix buzzed with afternoon traffic, but inside everything felt strangely calm for the first time in years. Harrison checked his watch again and gave me an apologetic smile before leaning back in the booth. He told me he had a board meeting he could not miss, but before leaving, he asked if I would let him make up for the chaos at the jewelry store by taking me to dinner sometime. I nearly laughed from disbelief because men like Harrison Walsh did not ask women like me out to dinner. At least, that was what years of being treated like the less important sister had taught me to believe. I remember staring down at my coffee cup for a second before finally answering him. My cheek still burned from Amber slapping me, and emotionally, I felt bruised in ways that had nothing to do with her hand. But Harrison looked at me with genuine interest. Not pity, not amusement, and definitely not the dismissive tolerance I had grown used to from people who knew my family dynamic. I finally agreed to dinner, though part of me expected him to change his mind the second he walked out the door. Instead, he smiled warmly, handed me his personal number, and told me Friday night at 7 if I was free. After he left, I sat there alone for nearly 10 minutes trying to process how my life had spiraled from public humiliation to coffee with one of the richest men in Arizona in the span of 2 hours. The second I got back to my apartment, reality crashed down on me again. I had 17 missed calls from my mother, 6 from Amber, and 3 from my father. My stomach sank because I already knew exactly what was coming. Sure enough, the moment I answered Mom's call, she launched into a furious lecture before I could even say hello. She accused me of embarrassing Amber publicly, ruining her special time after her engagement announcement, and making the entire family look bad in front of strangers. What stunned me most was that she barely even mentioned the slap. In her version of events, Amber had simply become emotional because I had apparently been antagonizing her. Listening to my mother twist reality so casually felt like someone slowly pouring ice water down my spine. I tried explaining calmly what actually happened, but Mom kept interrupting me. She said Amber had been crying hysterically ever since being removed from the jewelry store, and that Trevor was questioning whether he wanted to marry into such a dramatic family. Then she said something that finally broke something inside me. She told me I should have been more understanding because Amber was under stress and because I had always been stronger emotionally. That same excuse again. The same one I had heard my entire life whenever Amber hurt me. Jessica is stronger, Jessica can handle it. Jessica is independent. It suddenly hit me that nobody in my family had ever once asked whether I wanted to be the strong one. They had simply assigned me the role because it made their lives easier. For the first time in my life, I did not apologize. I told my mother very calmly that Amber physically assaulted me in public because she could not tolerate seeing me celebrated for anything. Then I said something I had never dared to say out loud before. I told her she had spent our entire lives teaching Amber that her feelings mattered more than everyone else's. The silence on the other end of the phone was so complete I thought the call had disconnected. Then Mom quietly called me selfish before hanging up. I stared at my phone afterward with shaking hands, but underneath the hurt, I felt something else too, relief, raw, terrifying relief. Friday arrived faster than I expected, and I nearly canceled dinner 3 separate times. Every insecurity I had spent years collecting came roaring back. I convinced myself Harrison had only asked me out because he felt guilty about the misunderstanding at the jewelry store. I stood in front of my closet for almost an hour trying to pick something to wear before finally settling on a dark green dress I had bought on clearance 2 years earlier and never had the confidence to wear. When Harrison arrived at my apartment building personally instead of sending a driver, my nerves somehow doubled. He looked effortlessly handsome in dark slacks and a fitted black button-down shirt, but what struck me most was the way he looked genuinely happy to see me. Dinner itself felt effortless in a way I had never experienced before. Harrison asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He wanted to know about my design work, my favorite projects, the books I read, the places I wanted to travel someday. Most men I had dated either talked endlessly about themselves or treated my career like a cute hobby. Harrison treated my thoughts like they mattered. At one point, I realized nearly 2 hours had passed without him checking his phone once. That tiny detail affected me more than I expected because I had spent most of my adult life feeling invisible in conversations. With Harrison, I felt seen in a way that was almost unsettling. Over the next few weeks, we kept seeing each other, slowly at first, then constantly. Harrison never tried to impress me with money, even though his world was unimaginably different from mine. Instead, he impressed me with consistency. He remembered details. He showed up when he said he would. He treated waiters, assistants, and strangers with the same respect he gave CEOs. One evening, he admitted something that surprised me deeply. He said watching Amber slap me in that jewelry store had genuinely enraged him because he recognized the look on my face afterward. He told me he had spent years watching his younger brother shrink himself emotionally to survive constant comparison and criticism. He said he recognized that same exhaustion in me instantly. Meanwhile, Amber's life was beginning to crack beneath the surface. Trevor apparently hated public conflict and became increasingly distant after the jewelry store incident. According to my mother, he felt uncomfortable with Amber's temper and the way she handled confrontation. Instead of reflecting on her behavior, Amber blamed me entirely. She started telling relatives I had manipulated the situation to embarrass her because I was jealous of her engagement. A few family members believed her. Others stayed neutral. Almost nobody asked for my side. That hurt more than I wanted to admit. But this time, instead of desperately trying to defend myself, I pulled back emotionally. I stopped attending every family dinner. I stopped answering every guilt-filled phone call. For once, I protected my peace instead of sacrificing it to maintain family harmony. About 3 months after the jewelry store incident, Harrison invited me to a charity gala his company hosted annually. The invitation alone terrified me. The event was filled with politicians, celebrities, investors, and people whose watches probably cost more than my yearly rent. I almost refused to go, convinced I would embarrass myself somehow, but Harrison gently encouraged me without pressuring me. The night of the gala, I stood in front of the mirror feeling completely out of place in the elegant black gown he had helped me choose. Then Harrison stepped behind me, rested his hands lightly on my shoulders, and said something I will never forget. He told me confidence was not about belonging to a certain social class. It was about understanding your own worth regardless of the room you walked into. The gala changed something fundamental inside me. Not because of the luxury or glamour, but because I realized how many of my insecurities had been inherited from years of emotional conditioning. People at the event responded warmly to me. Several were fascinated by my design background. One woman even offered me freelance opportunities after seeing some of my portfolio work on my phone. Nobody there treated me like I was less valuable than Harrison. The only person who had always made me feel small was Amber, and the terrifying truth was that I had spent years believing her version of me instead of forming my own. Unfortunately, the peace did not last long. 2 weeks later, Amber showed up unannounced at my apartment. The second I opened the door, I knew something was wrong. Her mascara was smeared, her hair looked unwashed, and her usual confidence had completely evaporated. Trevor had ended the engagement 3 days earlier after discovering she had lied about several financial issues and secretly opened credit cards in both their names without discussing it with him first. According to Amber, he had become cold and judgmental after the jewelry store incident and eventually started questioning other aspects of their relationship. She blamed me for all of it. At first, I felt sympathy despite everything. She was still my sister. But within minutes, the conversation spiraled into familiar territory. Amber accused me of turning everyone against her. She insisted Trevor would never have doubted her if Harrison Walsh had not publicly embarrassed her at Bellamy's. Then she demanded I speak to Harrison and convince him to help Trevor reconsider the breakup because apparently Trevor admired Harrison professionally. I genuinely thought she was joking at first. When I realized she was serious, something inside me finally snapped permanently. I told Amber I was done cleaning up the consequences of her behavior. Completely done. Her expression shifted instantly from desperation to fury. She called me selfish, arrogant, and pathetic. Then she sneered that Harrison would eventually leave me because men like him did not marry women like me. Normally, words like that would have shattered me for days. But this time, I simply looked at her calmly and realized I no longer believed her. That realization felt powerful beyond description. I told her to leave my apartment and not contact me again until she could speak to me with respect. She laughed bitterly on her way out and said I would come crawling back to the family eventually because family was all I had. The irony was almost painful because for the first time in my life, I was beginning to understand that family was not supposed to feel like emotional survival. Healthy love was not conditional on staying small. Harrison never made me shrink, my friends never made me shrink. Only Amber and my parents had demanded that version of me repeatedly over the years. Once I saw that clearly, I could never unsee it again. A month later, my parents invited me to dinner claiming they wanted to repair things between us. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The evening started politely enough, but tension simmered beneath every conversation. Then Mom eventually asked whether Harrison planned to attend Thanksgiving with us. The question itself was loaded because suddenly, after years of barely acknowledging my accomplishments, my parents were intensely interested in my relationship. Dad even joked awkwardly about tech stocks and investment opportunities. I realized with growing discomfort that they viewed Harrison's wealth as social validation for the family. Then Amber arrived late. The second she walked through the door, I could feel the atmosphere change. She barely looked at me before launching into complaints about Trevor, her finances, and how unfair life had been recently. My parents instantly shifted into comforting mode, just like always. Watching it happen felt surreal because for once I could see the pattern objectively instead of emotionally. Amber eventually turned toward me with narrowed eyes and asked whether Harrison was helping pay my rent now. The table fell silent. Years ago, I would have laughed nervously and tried to diffuse the tension. This time, I simply answered honestly. I told her no because unlike her, I handled my own responsibilities. Mom immediately scolded me for being harsh even though Amber had insulted me first. That was the exact moment I realized nothing would ever truly change inside that family structure. They needed me to absorb blame quietly because it maintained balance for everyone else. So I stood up calmly, placed my napkin beside my untouched dessert, and told them I loved them but I would no longer participate in relationships where respect only flowed one direction. My mother looked stunned. Dad looked uncomfortable. Amber rolled her eyes dramatically, but I walked out anyway. Outside, the night air felt cool against my skin as I sat in my car trying not to cry. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from Harrison asking how dinner went. I stared at the screen before finally admitting the truth. I told him I thought I had just changed my relationship with my family forever. His response came almost immediately. He said sometimes losing unhealthy versions of love is the first step toward finding healthy ones. 6 months after the slap at Bellamy's, Harrison took me back there. At first, walking into that store again made my chest tighten with anxiety. I could practically hear the echo of Amber screaming at me across the polished floors. But Harrison gently took my hand and guided me toward the same display where I had first bought my diamond earrings. Tara recognized me instantly and smiled warmly. This time, though I did not feel intimidated standing there, I felt grounded, strong. Like the woman who walked into Bellamy's now was completely different from the woman who had entered terrified months earlier. Harrison asked Tara to bring out a specific ring he had selected earlier. My breath caught the second I saw it because it was elegant without being flashy, classic, beautiful, timeless. Harrison turned toward me then, and for a moment the entire world seemed to narrow down to just his voice. He told me loving me had taught him something important too. He said strength was not loud, cruel, or demanding the way people often imagined. Real strength was quiet resilience. Kindness after disappointment, hope after rejection. He said I had spent years surviving emotional storms without realizing how remarkable that made me. Then he asked me to marry him. I started crying before he even finished the sentence. Not delicate movie tears either. Full, shaking, ugly crying right there in the middle of the jewelry store where my sister had once slapped me for daring to believe I deserved something beautiful. And somehow that felt poetic. The place where I had once been humiliated became the place where I finally understood my worth completely. I said yes, obviously. Word spread through my family quickly afterward. Mom called sobbing with excitement. Dad suddenly wanted to reconnect constantly. Amber, however, reacted exactly the way I expected. She accused me online of chasing money and manipulating Harrison. Several relatives privately encouraged me to forgive her because she was struggling emotionally. But forgiveness no longer meant allowing abuse into my life. That lesson had cost me 27 years to learn. Today, when I look at the diamond earrings sitting beside my engagement ring on my dresser, I realize they were never really about jewelry. They were proof that I could choose myself. Proof that my achievements mattered even when nobody clapped for them. Proof that I did not need to stay hidden in someone else's shadow just to keep the peace. And the strangest part is that none of this happened because a billionaire walked into a jewelry store. My life changed because for the first time ever, when someone tried to make me feel small, I finally stopped agreeing with them.